Hello and welcome at this masterclass, a masterclass about focus and productivity. My name is Lisanne and I will be your host during this masterclass, which means I'm here right now and I will back with you guys during our live Q&A after the masterclass. So stay tuned when the presentation part is over, because in the Q&A you can ask all your questions to the psychologists. But also, if you have tips or advices, you can also share that. You can do all of that in chat box on the right side of your screen. You can also say hi or whatsoever. We always like to see your comments and your questions, so be active in there if you would like. And today we will be discussing focus and productivity. I won't be doing that, but my colleagues and psychologists Jochem Buckman and Emma White, they will be guiding you through the psychology and science behind focus and productivity. A challenging and important topic, because finding focus and being in a flow really makes us happy. So how can we find that? How can we find that sweet spot? And in this masterclass, they will be guiding you through, well, the challenges you can find there and the science behind it, but also how do you set goals and how do you prioritize your tasks, and what is procrastination and how to deal with this. So I would like to give the word to psychologist Jochem Buckman. See you later.
And also on my behalf, welcome to this masterclass. Pleasure for me to be here again. Lisanne already set the introduction here, but we will be talking about productivity and focus today. And I think as always, it's important to start with the why here. And in this case, the why is that we believe there is quite a bit of challenge involved when it comes to our focus and productivity. And let this already be the first one. If you'd like to share a bit about what you find challenging when it comes to productivity, feel free to share that in the chat and we will come back to it at a later point. But just to give a bit of an overview, like, why is this an important topic to talk about? Well, I think first off, one of the things that we've found over the last couple of years, but more specifically over the last few years, connected to, of course, the pandemic, was that we tend to have the tendency to be constantly on, to be constantly online and be available and always have the opportunity to be productive, as the sort of line between work and private life started fading over the last couple of years, which we think definitely impacts the way we not only look at productivity, but also the way we deal with that as a whole. Apart from that, we're living in the age of distractions. There's always something to do somewhere, and we're always intimately aware of that, which, is for a large part due to these little devices in all of our pockets. We are very prone to be distracted, which is definitely one of the things that makes it more troublesome to find your focus and to find your productivity. One of the other challenges that we're seeing is that companies are growing very fast, and that entails a lot of changes within, and also when companies are merging, for instance, that involves a lot of changes in what your directives might be, some of the things that you might want to focus on. And dealing with that change, of course, has its implications for your general productivity as well. And then lastly, I think what we believe productivity is very much a challenge as well. We're seeing very big differences, and I'm seeing them within clients as well, that some people that I talk to on a weekly basis report that if they're working between 9 and 5, it means that they're working for the first hour, maybe 2, they take a half an hour break, they're working again for an hour, something like that, and then there's an hour-long lunch break, and then there's a break again in the afternoon, and that's to them, that's the 8-hour work week. But actually I had a client this very morning that was stating that her workday is between 8 in the morning and 8 at the evening, and there's very little breaks in between. It was a good thing that she really liked her job, but I think this is what really makes it different. How do we perceive what it means to be productive, and when should we be productive? I think that notion of that we should be online and active the entire day is one of the main things that's actually stopping us from being productive. And we'll get into that a bit later during this masterclass, but already important to realize that maybe one thing that's stopping us from being productive is ourselves, right? One of the biggest mistakes that we're making when it comes to productivity is that we're trying to manage our time instead of managing our motivation and energy. And what we mean by that is that often that people come to us and they're talking about, could you give me some of these tricks or tools on how to manage my time better, how to make more effective plannings or stuff like that. And then often it's really about people not managing themselves correctly, not taking the breaks, not being concerned with what's giving them or draining their energy or doing something that they don't like at all, right? We can't force ourselves to be productive all day, every day. I think the biggest takeaway there. But of course, for a masterclass that is about this topic, we will get into a bit more. Within these challenges, how can we still strive to be more productive and more focused? But before that, I think it's important to, as scientists, of course, to also look into the science behind that productivity and focus for a bit. And of course, science always starts with aiming to define what it is exactly that we're talking about. So what is productivity and focus? For that, we borrowed a bit from our friends down over at Cambridge. Productivity is then defined as the rate at which a person, company, or country does useful work. Or of course, we can have a debate about what useful is. But it's really about that process of providing some sort of going to some sort of an output. And focus is... it could be described as careful attention. So careful you can give to something as a task, an ability, or giving your full attention to something. And to me, often the metaphor is that of a camera lens, something that you can actually point it towards, and then your focus is what your lens is on, and something we can luckily train over time. So if we have that, it could be good to go a bit more into how is that working in our brain, these productivity and focus things. And I'd like to borrow a bit from Daniel Kahneman's work. He wrote a very high-selling, best-selling novel, which was called Thinking Fast and Slow, in which he got more into the neurology of productivity. And what he sees there, or for that, I think it's good to acknowledge that our brains are essentially lazy. And I'm stating that because, well, I think it's true. And there's good reason for our brains to be lazy, right? Our brains, on average, take up about 2% of our entire body weight. And even when we're not being that active, it consumes up to 20% of our body's energy, our glucose. Which means that our brains tend to be lazy in the sense that they like to take shortcuts. If you don't have to use a lot of brain activity to achieve a certain task, then your brain really doesn't want to. And this is very much connected to the first of the two systems, which is system one, which is the more intuitive system, which takes a lot of these shortcuts, and it's something that we're dealing with a lot. Not necessarily a bad system, right? This is one of these things that if you're stepping into a shady bar, for instance, that's warning you and telling you to get out. It may not be logical to get out, but it could also be very good to listen to system one in this case, right? So it's automatic, it's unconscious, it's quick and dirty, so to say. That in stark contrast with the other system, which is a much slower, much more rational, and is really great for these complex decision making, such as doing studies or research into something or finishing that big project that you've been working on for a while. The trick is that we have a natural tendency to be in system one and also kind of a proclivity to try to fix everything in system one because it's so fast and it takes relatively less energy, right? But for a lot of things, system two may actually be a better fit. The key point there is that it takes about 20 to 25 minutes to actually get into that system, right? We need some time to convince our brain to actually get into that different mode. I'll get into system two a bit more in a minute, but let's already take a minute to acknowledge that. So how can you help yourself to work with your system two a bit more? I think a big part of that is managing not just yourself, not just have the biggest focus on discipline, but also managing your environment a bit more. So that means asking yourself the question, when are you at your most productive and focused? And I'd like to invite you for a bit to do a little bit of a visualization exercise with me. So if you feel comfortable, of course, none of this is mandatory, and I can definitely not check if you're actually doing it at this moment. But I do want to invite you to close your eyes for a minute, sit back for a bit, see if you can just arrive in this moment, and then see if you can visualize your perfect productive environment. Let's first start with, how does it look like? Are you, for instance, sitting at a desk? And then what kind of desk is it? And how does your desk look like? Is it a bit messy? Do you see things everywhere that may inspire your creativity? Or is it very neatly ordered and organized? Is it all cleaned up? Are you working from a laptop sitting on a bench, or are you seeing multiple screens in which you're doing your work? Or perhaps your work is much more creative and you're seeing, I don't know, a canvas that you're working on. And also think about, what are you hearing? Are you perhaps listening to some music that helps you relax? Are you sitting in a really quiet environment? Or are you sitting in a very busy environment? Maybe you have some people around you. Maybe you prefer working at the office or in a cafe instead of home. Take a moment to visualize that for yourself. And if you're listening to this at a later time, feel free to pause the video at this point to really get into that and make some notes for yourself as well. What do you see in that environment? Of course, the key here is to see in what way can you recreate that environment on a daily basis so you can help yourself a bit more with your productivity. Which brings us to what I think we're striving for. If you still have your eyes closed, by the way, this could be a good time to open them again. Which brings us to System 2 and what it can offer. And what it can offer is what we'd like to call flow. So it's a concept that was invented by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, which is probably not the correct translation. Sorry for that, Mihai, if you're listening to this. I did try my best to figure this one out. But when it comes to the concept of flow, what he found was that some of these best moments in life often are not these passive, receptive, relaxing times. It's often these times when we're feeling stretched, when we're really just on the sort of edge of our comfort zone, or maybe a bit behind it already, and it's having that voluntary effort into accomplishing something difficult and worthwhile. So it's really connected to taking the time to get into that System 2 so you can experience flow, that great sense of really being with the thing that you're trying to achieve. Which could be visualized like this. That you have on the one axis, you have challenge, which is connected to how arousing you find that challenge. At the other hand, you have skill, being very efficient or effective at something, and being not being very effective at something. And this creates a sort of a loop that we're working between challenge and skill, where at one hand we're trying to increase skill, and as we're doing that, then of course the challenge becomes lower, at which point we're demanding less skills of ourselves, which means we need to increase the challenge. And this enables us to spend as much time as we can in that flow state. And there's a lot of ways which you can do to help yourself get into a bigger flow state. It means that you know what a challenge actually may mean to you, right? So, for instance, if you want to learn how to play tennis and you can't play tennis at all, what you could do is just start by yourself for a bit, but it becomes boring and maybe it's not challenging enough because you knew some tennis when you were younger. But at the other hand, if you're starting off tennis and you already start practicing with, I don't know, Federer, then perhaps it's too much of a challenge and you're going to find yourself losing focus and flow again. So the key there is to really see what the adequate level of challenge and skill for you could be to achieve that. And there's lots of ways to improve upon that. It's has everything to do with getting these results clear, what they may mean to you, setting that right challenge for yourself. And also, of course, managing your brain and your environment in the correct way. But I think the biggest thing you can do to not only help your productivity, but also spend more time in that flow state is by actually setting goals. Before I forget, I think it's good to mention we cannot spend all of our time in a flow state, of course. This is also about these couple of hours, and I think it's really important to see how we can fill in those couple of hours the most effectively. And on that notion, I think my colleague Emma will tell a bit more on how to actually set these goals in the best way.
So now we understand a bit better how our brains work regarding productivity, and that we only really have a few hours each day that we are able to spend in system 2 thinking and eventually get to some form of flow. It's really important that we then think, okay, how are we going to organize the time and how are we going to use the time that we have in the most effective way possible? Now, the answer lies in that it's really important to create clear and solid foundations for yourself to be productive. Often when clients come to us with productivity challenges and we ask them questions about what may be underlying their productivity challenges, we tend to see that it's unclear for them what they're supposed to be doing, what is expected of them, when they know that they're successful, how to be successful. And you can imagine if we only have a certain amount of time that our biology allows us to be focused and productive, we need to be able to direct that attention that we have to the right things. And that's when coming to setting goals and setting the right goals is a very important step to take. So let's dive into that a little bit further. So the famous researchers Locke and Latham stated in their goal-setting theory and task performance theory that a major source for people to become good people in how they achieve their tasks is to be motivated by something, and that is a goal. They see that people are very good at getting to where they need to be and that they're motivated in doing so when they have goals, and ultimately, of course, perform better. Now, according to their theory, the goals need to be specific and they need to be challenging. So when you look at the challenging aspect, it's kind of what Jochem explained, right? Regarding the tennis, you don't want it to be too difficult, but you don't want it to be too easy either. When we're talking about goals being specific, you can imagine that just saying, try your best or give it your all isn't going to really motivate you. It needs to be more specific than that. So it could be that you say that I want to achieve 80% correct on my exam, or that I want to achieve a better time than my last time during a race. That's already a more specific goal. Now, since this theory, many new theories have been created regarding goal setting and all based in the roots of Locke and Latham. But one that we really want to share with you is the Objectives and Key Results framework. Now, this framework was introduced and founded by Andy Grove, who was the CEO of Intel, and was introduced by his mentee, John Doerr, in big tech giants like Google and Amazon. And they say that they're one of the reasons that these companies are so successful. And the reason that this framework is so effective really lies in its simplicity, and is the reason that more and more companies are using this at an organizational level, team level, but also an individual level, like you and me. Okay, so OKRs, what is that then exactly? Well, the O stands for objectives, and that is the what. So this is where you want to be. This is the reason that you're doing something. And these tend to entail the most important things that you want to do or focus on in the next 30 to 90 days. And it's really important here that they're motivating and that they're inspiring. So it's a qualitative goal. So for example, I might think that my goal is that I want to make promotion this year. But if I then ask myself the question, why do I want to make a promotion? Then I start to think, okay, what's the reason then behind it? It might be that I want to earn more money because I want to buy a house. Or it could be that I want to have more influence on decisions that are made at a higher level. Now, those are really the things that are driving me. So that really taps into my motivation and why I want to get a promotion. So if you can make your objective more about that rather than the promotion, you have a more motivating and inspiring goal for yourself, or maybe even for your team or department. So when you have the objectives, we go to the key results. So if the objectives is the direction that you're heading, the key results is how you're going to get there. And the road to the objective has to be specific, it has to be time-bound, measurable, and verifiable. And to give an example of what an OKR then would look like, So I think we have two. One is more focused on private life and one more on work life. I think I'm just going to focus on the work life one for now. So imagine that you're a marketeer, so you're working in a marketing team, and your objective for yourself and your team might be that you want to achieve the highest customer satisfaction ratings in the industry. Now that's an audacious, motivating goal. So what are then going to be your key results? Well, they could be that you want to collect feedback from 100 top customers via in-depth interviews. Your second one could be to conduct 200 phone interviews with recently churned customers. A third one could be that you exceed the Net Promoter Score of over 8.0. Now, this is just an example, but hopefully clarifies a bit more how this framework looks like and how you could use it. And if you're not convinced yet by the OKRs, let me just share a few benefits that are, well, just in general also important to share. Well, first of all, it is focus, because it's often limited in numbers, the number of objectives that you have. Maybe there are 1 or 2 that you have for yourself or for your team, and ultimately you only have about 3 or 5 key results. So it really focuses where you want to put your motivation and your energy in. The second benefit is alignment. So this is especially important if you're setting goals for your team or for your department, or in private life, maybe with your partner or family, is that you make sure that you're all having the nose in the right direction. So because you're doing this together, you can align and make sure that you're all trying to focus on the same things. The third one is commitment, whether it's for yourself, that you're dedicating time to formulate your OKRs, or whether it's together with your team and you're getting everybody involved. And when you're involved and when you've put that time and energy into it, you're going to have a higher commitment on really focusing on your key results and your objective. The fourth one is tracking. So because the key results are specific and they're measurable, you're able to track where you are in achieving your key results and getting where you want to ultimately be in your objective. Now, and then the last one, and this is my favorite one, this is stretching. And Larry Page from Google stated about how he sees this in his OKRs, that I'd rather have the objective that we're going to go to Mars and that we might end up at the moon if we don't get to Mars. So that's really ultimately what the OKRs are really trying to do, and that is to push people and organizations and teams that little bit further than that they thought was possible. So even if you don't get to Mars, at least you'll be at the moon if you don't get there. So a lot of things that there are to share about OKRs. So I really invite you to dive into this topic more regarding your productivity, but these are the most important things that we wanted to share with you today. So the main takeaway here regarding goal setting is do a check-in with yourself when you feel that you're not being as productive as you'd hope you'd be, whether you're focusing on the right things, if you have your goals in place, where do you know when you're going to be successful? And if you can, do this with others, with your partner, with your team, with your family, or check with your manager to make sure that the goals that you are setting are focusing on the right things and that your energy and motivation are directed towards that. Okay, so we're talking about that solid foundation, and that's somewhere we can get with setting our objectives or goals. But when we have that in place, how do we then ensure that our attention and focus stays on these things and we don't get overwhelmed by colleagues coming and leaving, new tasks coming your way, changes in scope? A lot of things happen. So how do you stay on course and don't get distracted by all these other things? Well, the answer lies in setting priorities. So to decide where does my attention go to and when. Now, a very useful tool that we'd like to share with you is the Eisenhower matrix. Well, the Eisenhower matrix is about 2 axes. So we have the urgency axis at the top, and then on the vertical side, we have the importance axis. So when we're talking about urgency, we're talking about tasks that might be coming in that have to be done now, because if you don't, they have clear consequences if you don't do it. And that the more that you might avoid them and not do them, the more stress it could be for you and others. When we're talking about the degree of importance, it's about to what degree contribute to your objectives and to your goals. So they might not have to happen now and be urgent, but they do have to happen at some point because they really impact your goals. Now, having these two axes, we get 4 different areas where you could plot certain tasks coming in or the tasks that you already have. So if you look at the do it part, this is when things are urgent and important. So they need to happen now, and they influence and impact your objectives. So do it as fast as you can. The second one is scheduling it. So we're just moving to the side now. So this is when things are not urgent, but they are important. So they do need to happen at some point. So then we would ask you to schedule it at a time when you have the time for it, so at least it's there. If we move to the bottom now, when things are urgent and not important, because they're not important, they obviously don't influence your objectives, but they are important enough because they're urgent that they need to happen. So maybe it's an idea to see who you could delegate it to, because if it's not contributing to your goals and it does have to happen, it's maybe contributing to somebody else's goals. Well, the last one is when things are not urgent and not important. So then we want to eliminate it because, well, it doesn't need to happen because there are no consequences, and apparently it's not important, so just don't do it. So this is just giving some view of how you could use this matrix. Some people print it out and have it kind of lying down on their desk or have it on their phone. But another metaphor I'd still like to share with you regarding this matrix is one from the productivity guru Franklin Covey. And he's really zooming in on the scheduling part of your tasks. And what he says is that, as a metaphor, imagine that you have this glass jar. And next to the glass jar, we have big rocks and we have small rocks. Now, if we would put all the small rocks into the jar first, and we try to then fit in the big rocks, you'll see that they won't really fit. Because ultimately they could fit, but by putting the small ones in first and then the big ones, it's more difficult to fit them in. But imagine if we turn it around and we first put the big rocks into the jar, and then we add in the small rocks, and you'll see that they all kind of fall around the big rocks. Now imagine that this jar is your work week and the rocks are your tasks. And then the same principle applies, because if you then schedule in your big rocks into your planner and into your agenda, you can more easily fit the small rocks around it. And then the time and the energy and the motivation that you have at least go to the most important things, and then maybe more your system 1 thinking can go to the smaller tasks that you have. So to conclude, we have discussed the steps of understanding what productivity is and how to really create those foundations through goal setting and prioritization so that you can at least focus the energy and the motivation and the time that you have on the most important things. The next, we want to dive in a little bit deeper into a pitfall that we often see with clients regarding productivity, and that is procrastination. Because don't we all procrastinate at some point in our life, whether it's putting off going to the gym for that really exciting episode on Netflix that you don't want to miss, or delaying writing that report that's been lying on your desk forever by cleaning your room again, or maybe you're just rescheduling your dentist point every month. Well, procrastination is one of the most universal forms of self-sabotage, what we call it, because we're by definition delaying something even though we know it would be better if we didn't. And that's really what comes forward in the definition, right, of procrastination. So you're putting things off intentionally or voluntarily despite knowing of the negative consequences of putting them off. So why do we then do this? Why do we procrastinate? Well, we see in our practice 2 main reasons for this that we'd like to share. And the first is that we can find tasks overwhelming. So they give us feelings of anxiety and stress. And then we decide to do something else to avoid having those feelings. A reason could be that you believe that you don't have the skills or the abilities to do it, so I'd rather just do something else. It could be that you're really perfectionistic and you have these massively high expectations of yourself that really prevent you from even starting because you're like, never mind, I'm going to do something else. Another reason could be that you have a fear of making mistakes, and that this fear is so big that it prevents you from doing it because you don't want to risk making a mistake. And I actually had a client who really had these fear of missing mistakes. And what he was intentionally doing at some point was becoming late to different meetings. He was becoming really sloppy in his work. And he said that he was doing this because he didn't want to get promoted or get extra responsibilities at work, because if he would get that, there would be more expectations of him, and that would really tap into his fear of failing. So that's just a way that we can procrastinate and get in the way of ourselves. But another reason could be is that we really just don't enjoy doing the task and we find it boring. So we're really not being challenged, or we don't enjoy it. And this really links to the motivation topic and the challenge topic that we've been discussing earlier. So how do we then deal with procrastination? Well, with any kind of change, we need to start with awareness, to really take a step back and analyze what's happening in these moments of procrastination. So a question to you could be, when and why are you procrastinating? What are the moments and what is the reason that you're doing it? This is something you can reflect on right now, or maybe at a later moment, but I definitely invite you to do it if this is something that you're struggling with. So when we know when and why we're doing it, we can compassionately try and understand what procrastination is trying to do for us. Because in that moment that you decide to do something else than the thing that you were planning on doing, you apparently have this need that you're trying to fulfill, whether it's a need to be more calm or a need to feel more challenged, that you tend to do something else. So by knowing that you have this need and understanding where it's coming from, you can then try and explore what are alternate ways of behaving that are more productive for you and that could still help you do these tasks and get where you want to be. And to make this more concrete, if we're looking at those feelings of being overwhelmed, you can maybe revisit your goals and ask yourself, okay, maybe my goals are too big. Maybe I need to make it into something smaller so I feel less anxious and I feel less overwhelmed. And that's a way of addressing that need of being more calm. If it's coming to perfectionism or that you have a fear of making mistakes, maybe you can challenge yourself by asking, what is the chance that you're really going to fail? And these high expectations I have of myself, are other people setting these expectations? Or is it just me? And is there a way that I can maybe lower them for myself? When it's coming down to a lack of motivation, you can ask yourself, okay, what is it that I need to feel motivated? Maybe you can revisit your objectives and see, okay, how can I make this more motivating, that I know that this is just part of the journey to get where I want to be? Sometimes that is difficult, and then we would advise, when you start your day, eat the frog first. So the task that you don't want to do, start with it. So then it's just done and dusted, and you don't need to think about it anymore. Another tip that we could share is that you focus on the positive outcomes of doing the task. So often we focus on, I don't want to do it, and it really doesn't motivate me. I don't really enjoy doing any of this. But how would it feel if you have done the task, that it's finally off your to-do list? How would it contribute to you reaching your goals? If we can shift our mindset to what it can bring us rather than what it takes from us, that could also work as a way of overcoming this procrastination. So by taking these steps, you can address your procrastination by understanding when you're doing it, why you're doing it, what need you apparently have in this moment of procrastination, and what are alternate ways of addressing this need that you have so that you can address the procrastination that you see in yourself. Lastly, we just want to share a few general helpful tools regarding productivity that we think are really important to share. So the first one might seem a bit basic, but it's so important, and it's one of the things that we overlook the most, and that is check into your lifestyle. So how are you sleeping? How are you eating? How are you moving? And how are you relaxing? And one thing I often say to my clients is those moments that you feel like you really don't have time for a break, that's when you need it the most, so take it, and you'll always see that you're more productive afterwards. Also, when you're having these breaks, and I'd recommend having them maybe every hour, just getting up, stretching, going for a walk, having a sip of a drink, check in with yourself. How am I feeling, and what do I need right now? And when you address this, you'll see that your body will thank you in being more productive afterwards. Communicate boundaries is also really important. So when you notice that you want to focus and you have time scheduled for yourself to focus, communicate to the people around you that you're going to be focusing. Whether it's just saying it, closing your door, putting on an away status on Microsoft Teams or on Skype, whether it's any other reason you could think of that you can some way show to others that you're focusing and you can really protect your time and your attention. Trap of multitasking, that's pretty simple. Just don't do it, because all the different things that we're doing at the same time, you'll see in the end, all of these things take a lot longer when you're trying to do multiple things at once, because our brain can't. So it's way better just to do one thing at a time. Lastly, celebrate the small wins. We can often feel a bit disheartened by the length of the lists of the things that we need to do and focus on the things that we haven't done, but you'll see that it's really motivating to celebrate the small things that you are achieving, whether it is taking that break, whether it is asking for help, whether it is just achieving that small part of what you wanted to do. I would invite you to do that more often, to celebrate the small wins. Well, then we're already arrived at the end of the presentation part of the masterclass, where we feel that we've shared the most important things that we know regarding productivity and focus, where I do want to just remind you one more time of our main takeaway, and that's the productivity isn't just about managing time, but it's also about managing your energy and your motivation. And we hope that this masterclass has given you the tools to start doing this more. But don't go yet, because we'll dive into the Q&A in a bit to discuss this topic further. So see you there.
Hello again, and thanks for tuning into the Q&A. And thanks, Emma and Jochem, for all this information about productivity and focus. I got overwhelmed, which I shouldn't, of course. But I also got stuck with that little thing you said in the end, right? Don't manage your time, but manage your energy and your motivation. That's what it's all about in the end. So it's very interesting. We got some questions up front to the masterclass, but if you have any questions right now, just ask them in the chat and we'll go over them. I already saw some. But one question is, to what degree does discipline plays a role in how productive I am?
Good question.
Well, I think, of course, it plays a role, right? But I feel that we've taken discipline on a sort of a pedestal, right? We've placed it somewhere where it's sort of, oh, you want to get something done, you just need to be more disciplined. And I think it doesn't deserve that place, right? It has a role, but it's so much more something that we can train and something that's very much dependent on other circumstances than just sort of something that you may or may not be born with, right? I think it's also not a most helpful way of looking at it. I think it's much more effective to look at your environment, about the things that you can be doing, the ways that you can be training yourself. And it's not just about I'm born disciplined or not. It is something that you can give yourself some time for, to learn a bit more, and may differ wildly. We feel like discipline is something that you could then apply to anything, but for instance, if I were to be working in a finance department, which as a psychologist I couldn't do, I could not, with all the discipline in the world, I would still not be able to focus right on that, because I quite frankly, it's just not the field that I'm in, right? So I think it's much more interesting to look at where you would fit in and how you can make your environment work for you than to focus on discipline.
Yeah, and I think also that element of motivation, right? So sometimes you really just have to do things right. That's also what we discussed and how you could address that. But that role of setting these audacious, motivating goals for you is a way that you can more likely get yourself to where you need to be rather than just relying on discipline. So I think it's just a different angle of looking at things. Discipline is definitely something you can train yourself in and you can come better at. But if you have those clear goals for yourself, you know where you want to be and you're managing your energy in a way, you'll see that discipline is maybe more of a secondary element.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice. Who needs discipline when you can just have fun whilst doing it? Right?
Exactly.
Exactly. That's a good way to look at it. Somebody also asks in the chat, not really a question for you guys, but he says, like, are there any hands out so that we have the prioritization matrix and the other info? And yes, you will get those in the email we sent you, I guess, a couple of hours after the masterclass. You will get a full guide with the matrix in there, so that you can just start plotting it for yourself, etc. So that will be coming your way. Another question from the chat is how to keep the motivation rolling after the initial burst. And I really relate. Like you feel it, and then after 10 minutes, like
10 minutes already. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely one of these things, right? I think this is also the New Year's Eve syndrome, right? January, we're all feeling motivated. Let's get to work, and then I'm seeing this in my neighborhood as well, right? You see everybody running all of a sudden. I was like, you guys were not running last week, right? And then in 3-4 weeks, something like that, it all plummets again. Whereas, of course, one of the most important thing is to get it into your system, and I think it's a bit of a large topic to get everything in here now, but to make that brief, I think it's important to see what's happening as you're getting. Is it that you're getting distracted? Is it that the goals that you're setting are not clear enough? So first check in on these two, see if you can manage your environment a bit better, and then also realize that we're mammals. We're not made to be productive all day, every day, right? So it's good to give yourself some slack. Allow yourself to fail every now and then on the goal that you're setting, and then regathering yourself to get back into it. Because it's normal, right? Or you can already see it here. You're stating, oh, this is such a relatable one for me. I think me and Emma are both sort of, this happens to me all the time as well. It is normal, and it's not about falling. It's about how you're getting back up, right?
And I think this also links to what we were saying at the beginning, right? These beliefs that we have to be productive all the time. Like we can't. And I think part of just accepting that you have that great burst of energy for 10 minutes and afterwards you don't. And the energy that you then use in, I'm annoyed that I don't have my energy anymore. You can use that to just rejuvenate, accept I'm feeling a bit less energized right now or less motivated, and indeed recollect yourself later, because that burst will come again. So work with that and don't fight against it.
Indeed, and accept it if it sometimes flows away and try again.
Yeah.
I like it, guys. Another question. What if you keep on procrastinating things and don't find your focus anymore?
Well, I think that's also what we discussed in the masterclass, right? So I think it's really important to understand why you're procrastinating and when. So really kind of zoom out of the situation. This is what I would do with clients as well, and see what's happening here. What are you feeling? What are your thoughts? How are you dealing with it? Because apparently in that moment, you have some need that you're addressing by not doing it. So what is that need? Is it that you're feeling overwhelmed and, it's too much to do this, so I'd rather do something that I feel a bit more relaxed or have more control over? If that's the case, what can you do then in that situation that can address that need in a more helpful way? Maybe you could say more kind things to yourself or talk to a friend who could give you like a pep talk to do it. So there's different reasons that you could do it. But I think, that zooming out and analyzing what's going on and that need is a important first step.
Yeah, get to know yourself also, actually. What is it in you that makes you procrastinate? And maybe start writing it down when it happens. Is there a pattern?
Exactly, yeah.
Bit of research there. Yeah, and I think it's always helpful to look at what kind of thoughts are you having at these times, right? Because often people are they procrastinated for a long time, and then it becomes an issue, right? Because I should have done this last week, and I'm doing it now, and I suck at this every time, and how do I get myself here, right? And then we're doing that, and then we're investing all of the energy that we could have been putting in the task at hand. We're putting into creating these sort of negative spirals in our own heads, and it's being aware of these spirals and then see if you can put a stop to them. Or at least direct him into a more helpful manner is one of those, I think, very important things to. It's a skill to learn as well.
Definitely, yeah.
It is. It is. Well, guys, those were the questions for now. So thanks again for being here and telling us all of this. And thank you guys for tuning in. And if you still have questions, don't hesitate to book a session with Emma or Jochem or one of the other psychologists, because they are really happy to help you out with your procrastination tasks or your focus or getting into that flow, because it is challenging and it is important for you to get there. So I hope to see you in one of our next masterclasses. And thanks for watching.